Hey guys, tonight we start beneath a violet desert sky, the heat still clinging to the stones, the wind curling around your ankles like a whisper from the past. You stand at the edge of Egypt's timeless sands, where golden light fades into the horizon, and a vast geometry of limestone sprawls before you, silent, still, and ancient. You've come here not for treasure, not for adventure, but for something far more complicated to understand: a civilization's obsession with lines, angles, and eternity. Welcome to the soothing, sun-bleached world of ancient Egyptian tomb maps. You're about to navigate passageways not meant for the living. Every inch of stone beneath your feet was once carved with intention, some of it divine, some of it very much human, and all of it designed to help someone else. Some long-dead royal reach the afterlife, and you're just tagging along. Oh, and you probably won't survive this. Not because of booby traps or curses, but because of boredom. Tomb blueprints weren't made to entertain, they were made to endure. You're diving headfirst into sacred geometry, dusty planning documents, and enough hallway symmetry to make your inner architect sigh in blissful monotony. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. But only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know your location and what time you're listening. I always love seeing where our sleepy little time travelers are tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You trudge toward the tomb complex, sand dragging at your shoes like a toddler refusing to leave the park. The sun's finally dipped behind the dunes, but the warmth still radiates from every block of stone. You reach out to touch one smooth, pale, slightly crumbly at the edges. The desert air has had its way with these monuments for over 4,000 years, yet the shape remains stubbornly angular. This isn't a place of chaos. It's a place of order. Everything here has been measured, aligned, and inscribed with the sort of precision that only a civilization with too much time and too many gods could commit to stone. Ahead of you, the entrance looms, not grand, not showy, just patient, like it's been waiting for you to notice it. You duck inside. Coolness wraps around your face like a silk scarf stored in an ancient stone freezer. Your footsteps echo off the walls, which tilt inward ever so slightly. It's not a mistake, it's a technique. The Egyptians built tomb corridors with trapezoidal profiles supposedly to resist collapse, or maybe to mimic the path to the stars, or maybe because someone sneezed during the blueprint phase and everyone was too polite to question it. Historians still argue whether these inward tilts were structural, symbolic, or just really good at messing with your sense of space. You follow the corridor, noting the fine chisel marks in the walls. Someone, multiple someones, spent months carving this by hand, guided only by flickering torchlight and the occasional argument about cubit measurements. A cubit, in case you're rusty on your Bronze Age units, is the length from your elbow to your fingertips. Naturally, every Egyptian's cubit was slightly different, which made for some fun guesswork in royal architecture. There were actual measuring rods passed down in workshops, hieroglyphic rulers, with divinely approved lengths. Because when you're building a home for eternity, you don't eyeball it. You reach a junction. Left, right. It doesn't matter. Both lead deeper down steps so shallow they feel more like formal apologies than stairs. This entire place is laid out like a circuit board carved by a monk. Turns aren't random, they're calculated. And they don't want you to walk casually through. No, they want you to process. Every step here is ritual. Every turn a choice. Some tombs have fake doorways or sudden dead ends, meant to confuse tomb robbers Or possibly, according to one fringe theory, confuse the soul just enough to keep it from getting homesick. The air gets heavier. Not in a horror movie way, more like your body is realizing it's 90% water and 100% not built for underground journeys. You pause to breathe. Inhale stone dust. Exhale reverence. You move on. The wall ahead bears faint red lines. Draft lines, not decorations. Some ancient architect had sketched a guide for where the next layer of plaster should go. You're staring at a 3,500-year-old to-do list. You can even see where someone adjusted the path, a different color, a different angle, maybe even a different scribe. Was it a correction from a foreman? Or an act of rebellion from an apprentice who hated being told where to draw lines? The geometry of this place is not just aesthetic, it's spiritual. The tomb isn't a resting place, it's a machine for rebirth, with every wall passage and shaft functioning like a gear. Ancient Egyptians believed that in death, you didn't just float off. You had to work your way back through the world of gods and judgment. And a well-mapped tomb was like handing your soul a very detailed GPS. Minus the rerouting, you reach a chamber. It's small, quiet, and a bit too symmetrical to be friendly. The ceiling curves inward, and you notice a vent-like shaft slicing upward at a sharp angle. That dear traveler points to the stars, or at least to one specific star, Orion's belt, sacred to Osiris. This isn't decoration, it's design. Ancient architects aligned shafts with constellations so the soul could exit through the heavens. It's the world's oldest stargate minus the explosions. There's a faint hum in the air, not sound, but presence. Maybe it's the geometry. Maybe it's your brain trying to interpret millennia of spiritual feng shui. Or maybe it's just your stomach reminding you that you skipped dinner for this. Either way, you lie down on the cool stone floor and imagine the soul of a long-dead nobleman drifting past, nodding politely at your awkward pose. You're in a space built for something most of us never think about: the journey after death, mapped by the living, maintained by geometry, and buried under desert sand. There's no drama here, no chaos, just the steady hum of purpose. Stone by stone, line by line, you sit up slowly. The air tastes like chalk and memory, and for a moment, you wonder if the walls are closing in. They're not. It's just the angle playing tricks on your tired eyes. Welcome to Egyptian architectural minimalism, oppressive, elegant, and deeply symbolic. You wander farther in this time, not through corridors, but across ancient drafting tables, at least in your mind. Because now, your attention shifts to how these tombs were planned. Not built by intuition, but drawn with rulers' cords, and the careful gaze of men who believed the afterlife began on paper. Imagine the blueprint of a pyramid. Not a fancy 3D rendering, just lines on papyrus drawn in red and black ink. Red for corrections, black for permanence. A single misstroke that could mean a crooked passageway, or an afterlife detour no soul wants to take. And these weren't just physical layouts. They were cosmological diagrams. Aligning with the stars wasn't optional. It was mandatory. A pyramid that didn't point home. That's an eternal navigation fail. You trace the air with your finger as if sketching the cross-section of the Great Pyramid. Base square. Triangular sides rising at exactly 51.5 degrees. No, not 51.4, you heretic. The angle matches the slope of sunlight during the equinox, or perhaps the reflection of the Benben stone, or perhaps no one knows. Historians still argue whether the angle held mathematical, astronomical, or mystical significance. But the fact that they use this same pitch over and over tells you one thing: it mattered. A lot. You picture them at work, teams of architects laying string across fields using sighting tools and wooden plumb bobs. They didn't have AutoCAD. They had math and time, and the motivation that comes with believing your design will either elevate a soul to divinity or trap it forever. The builders were bureaucrats of the eternal. Their blueprints were equal parts engineering and prayer. Some of the most famous layouts weren't even drawn for the pharaohs. They were copied in temples, etched on walls, or preserved in the tombs of lower officials as examples of proper design. Yes, ancient Egypt had poster-worthy architectural standards. Hang it in your tomb. Hope the gods approve. And let's talk about grids. You walk forward now, your feet sliding over what feels like subtle grooves in the floor. That's no accident. Some chambers were laid out on invisible grids, guidelines etched into the plaster or carved faintly into the limestone. A classic was the 18-square grid for drawing human figures, ensuring everyone, from Ra to Steve the Scribe, had proportionally sound limbs. But these grids went beyond illustration. They informed room layouts, ceiling heights, wall lengths. It's as if the entire tomb was drawn on invisible graph paper. You'd think this would make things boring. You'd be right, but only until you realize how obsessive it was. Imagine spending 10 years designing a burial chamber where one square is off, and now the sunbeam misses your mummy's face by 2 degrees forever. One famous example comes to mind: the tomb of Ramesses VI. On its ceiling is a diagram of Nut, the sky goddess, arching over the earth. Her body forms the boundary of the sky, and her placement aligned to cosmic principles so precise that the entire ceiling doubles as a calendar. You're not just walking through a tomb, you're walking under a cosmic diagram. And while we're here, let's sprinkle in a weird detail. There were secret codes in the proportions. Fringe theorists and a few respectable Egyptologists on their weirder days have pointed out that some tomb layouts mimic not just stars, but organs. As in a corridor aligned with the pharaoh's spine, the burial chamber where his heart would be. Was the tomb a body, a map of the cosmos, a to-scale spiritual transformer? Probably not all at once. Probably. You continue down a hall, lit only by the thought of sunlight. It bends, of course, and opens into a chamber with sharp corners and a strangely comforting geometry. You realize you've felt this shape before. It's a rectangle. Just a rectangle. But it's perfect. The ratio between the length and the width is nearly 1.618, the golden ratio. A mathematical sweet spot that appears in sunflower seeds, nautilus shells, and apparently the preferred real estate of the afterlife. Did they do it on purpose? Historians still argue about that too. Some say the Egyptians knew the golden ratio and used it deliberately. Others say it's coincidence. But you're lying in a stone room in the shape of mathematical beauty, and frankly, that's enough to make you feel like a well-placed ghost. Nearby, in the Valley of the Kings, similar ratios appear again and again. The lengths of corridors, the placements of pillars, even the gaps between ceiling beams. You could argue it's aesthetic preference, or maybe a spiritual constant. Either way, you get the sense that the builders weren't winging it. They were obeying something, an ancient blueprint standard handed down from priest to architect, like a holy user manual. You imagine that manual now. Thick papyrus scrolls, covered in cubits and notes. Scribbles in the margins from an apprentice who clearly had opinions about how close is too close for burial shafts. Somewhere in the ruins of Deir el-Medina, the village of workers who built the tombs, there are personal letters between draftsmen and stonecutters arguing over measurements. Yes, workplace email existed in 1200 BCE. It just took longer to chisel. And here's a fun, extremely Egyptian fact. They had draftsmen who specialized in drawing tombs. Not just any drawings, ritual floor plans. Blue ink for water elements. Red for divine protection. Black for final structures. It's like someone mixed religious dogma with architectural intern duties. Which, when you think about it, is exactly what ancient Egyptian life was like. You pause. The chamber is still. You hear nothing but the soft whistle of dry air pushing itself through ancient gaps. You realize that to the people who built this silence was not absence. It was proof the plan worked. Everything is where it should be. And so are you. You move deeper now, your hand brushing against the cool limestone wall as the passage narrows. The ground dips ever so slightly beneath your feet. The incline so gradual, it feels like the tomb itself is lulling you to sleep. But don't relax just yet. This part of the journey gets weird. You've arrived at the shaft zone. It starts subtly. You're walking along a standard corridor, rectangular plane, a little dramatic in its silence, when suddenly the floor drops. Not a staircase, not a ramp, just a pit. Sometimes a few feet deep, sometimes 40. There's no warning, no railings. OSHA did not exist in ancient Egypt. Just the gaping suggestion that if you weren't paying attention, you might join the afterlife early. These vertical shafts weren't for dramatic flair. They had purpose, or more accurately, several purposes, depending on who you ask. Some believe they were security features, psychological and physical barriers to deter tomb robbers. Others think they were symbolic spiritual elevators to the underworld. Still others say they were garbage chutes for construction debris. And historians, they're still arguing. You peer into one now. It's narrow, precise, and dizzyingly deep. The light from your imaginary torch doesn't reach the bottom. You drop a pebble. Wait. Nothing. Either it hit dust too softly to hear, or it never hit anything at all. Nice. You ease around the shaft's edge, using the original notches chipped into the wall grips for ancient workers who hauled stone blocks, jars of food offerings, and occasionally a wrapped-up royal carcass. And let's not forget the more awkward objects, folding beds, game boards, and that one time they packed 400 Shabti figurines into a burial chamber. It's like a Costco of the afterlife in there. And just when you think the floor can't drop again, it does. A second shaft, angled this time. Some tombs had nested systems of vertical and slanted passages like the tomb of Thutmose III. That one, it had a long winding staircase inside a shaft, inside a corridor, inside a cliff. Its geometry meets Russian nesting doll. As you pass each bend and drop, you start to notice the strange logic of it all. These weren't designed for quick access. Quite the opposite. You, the living, aren't supposed to be here. This was all engineered to slow down intruders and speed up the soul. For the dead, there was always a shortcut, symbolic paths, through walls, through art, through the spells carved into the stone. But for you, you get stairs. And bad knees. You reach a low chamber, just barely tall enough to stand in. The ceiling here is different flat, but cracked slightly. You can see where a beam once pressed too hard and buckled. But the wall decorations remain pristine. On one side, a map. Not a treasure map, not exactly. Just a series of boxes and squiggles, annotated with hieroglyphs. It looks like a weird subway system, but what you're actually seeing is something historians call a tomb layout diagram, a papyrus schematic used not just to record construction, but to visualize the metaphysical journey ahead. There's one famously preserved that might be the oldest known geological map, though again, scholars argue whether it's a literal map or just a scroll describing where a treasure stash was buried under someone's pet crocodile. Either way, you're looking at the ancestor of blueprints. And it's baffling. You follow the diagram with your eyes noting the twists and turns. What's odd is that many of the rooms in these maps didn't correspond neatly with what was built. Some chambers were left out. Some were added. Some shafts curve midway for no apparent reason, as if someone halfway through chisel duty just got bored and decided to spice things up. Or maybe it was intentional. Maybe they were mimicking the zigzag of the Duat, the Egyptian underworld, a realm of gates, riddles, lakes of fire, and of course, extremely detailed bureaucracy. And here's the kicker. Many of these underground layouts weren't even meant to be visited again. Once the body was in the tomb, was sealed sometimes permanently. Corridors were filled with rubble. Doors were plastered shut. False entrances were carved to fool potential looters. Some tombs even had dummy rooms, beautifully decorated chambers with no purpose other than to look important. It's like leaving decoy snacks in your fridge to trick midnight raiders. You duck into one of these side chambers now. It's small, windowless, and weirdly quiet, even for a tomb. No sarcophagus, no altar. Just smooth walls and a curved ceiling that reminds you of being inside a stone loaf of bread. This might have been a decoy. Or perhaps an unfinished storage space. Or let's get weird for a second. An echo chamber for rituals involving sound. Some fringe theories suggest that certain rooms were built to amplify chants, helping souls hear prayers from the living. You clap once. The sound pings back with a flat thump. Not very divine, but you tried. Back in the hallway, you run your fingers over the walls again. Some tombs were built with niches, mini side corridors that go nowhere. Some are the length of a forearm, others deep enough to crawl inside. Were they for ventilation, spirit portals, emergency naps for exhausted stonemasons? One hypothesis suggests these alcoves were used for hiding caches of sacred texts, papyrus scrolls, with spells from the Book of the Dead, instructions like turn left at the flaming snake, or chant 47 times while balancing your heart against a feather. Just your standard bedtime reading. You crouch, imagining slipping into one of these niches, holding a candle and a scroll, alone in the darkness, copying sacred diagrams by hand. It's quiet, dusty, comforting in a strange way. Maybe this is what they meant by peace in the afterlife. Not clouds and harps, but perfect solitude inside a math puzzle. You move on, gliding down yet another angled hall. This one narrows sharply, forcing you to turn sideways. If you're wondering whether this was intentional, yes. Tomb builders often constructed passages with tight turns and varying widths to control flow, not of air, but of you. These angles weren't mistakes. They were deliberate. Every turn disorients the living, and maybe reorients the dead. The physical path was a mirror of the spiritual one. Go forward, descend, be reborn. You reach another shaft and peer in. This one's sealed at the bottom. No door, no ladder, just a blank slab of stone with chisel marks you could fit your fingertips into. That's where this section ends, on the edge of something closed, something deliberately buried. The map doesn't lead you further. It just stops. Or maybe it starts again. You press your palm against the stone at the bottom of the shaft. It's cool, smooth and stubborn, like it knows more than it's willing to share. And then you remember, not all maps were carved in stone. Some were drawn. And one in particular is as famous as it is frustrating. Welcome to the story of the Turin Papyrus map. You rise slowly and retrace your steps, climbing out of the shaft, ascending into slightly less ominous darkness. Imagine unrolling a strip of ancient papyrus, faded but still intact, with delicate brush lines drawn in black and red ink. It looks like a kid's drawing of a landscape. It's got mountains, riverbeds, dotted lines, tiny labels. And yet, it's also probably the most advanced geological map from the ancient world. But here's the twist. It wasn't found in a library or a school. It was found in a tomb, drawn around 1150 BCE during the reign of Ramesses IV. This map shows part of Wadi Hammamat, a dry riverbed in the eastern desert. The papyrus, now housed in Turin, Italy, shows roads, hills, and locations where prized materials like Beckenstone were quarried. In other words, it's a map for miners. Resource extraction, ancient style. Except, it's also weirdly ceremonial. Some Egyptologists argue it was commissioned specifically for a royal quarrying expedition. Others think it was created as a commemorative object, a trophy of successful imperial logistics. And some suspect it had a deeper, almost spiritual function, because this wasn't just where to find rock. It labeled each hill by type. It annotated routes and destinations. It even highlighted dangerous areas, like place where you get ambushed by bandits with cool eyeliner, or something to that effect. You walk now as if inside the map, picturing the uneven terrain, the tight switchbacks drawn with careful lines. The artistic choices suggest someone didn't just observe, they interpreted. The colors were symbolic. The ink changes might have indicated risk levels. And then there's the biggest question of all. Why put it in a tomb? The scribe's name is known as Amenakti, son of Ipui, a draftsman from Deir el-Medina. He wasn't just some doodler. He was a respected artisan, part of the elite crew that built the royal tombs in the Valley of the Kings. So if he made this map, it meant something. And here's where it gets deliciously ambiguous. Some scholars believe the map wasn't just about rock. It was a kind of spiritual metaphor, a journey through terrain meant to mimic the soul's passage through the underworld. Those winding paths may be symbolic of trials. Those shaded hills, perhaps echoes of Duat's mountains. The location of the prized Beckenstone, a dark, hard stone used in sacred statues, could have represented the spiritual core, the destination of transformation. Or maybe it was literally just a mining document some bureaucrat threw into the tomb because, hey, Amenakti loved rocks. Historians still argue whether this map was practical, symbolic, or both. Like most things, ancient Egyptian, the answer is yes. But also maybe. You walk along an invisible road, thinking about how the ancient Egyptians saw landscape not as backdrop, but as participant. The earth was alive. Hills had names. Stones had powers. And maps weren't just guides. They were narratives, telling you where to go, but also what to feel along the way. The Turin map isn't the only non-map map you'll encounter. Some tombs contain layouts etched onto walls, or small slabs of limestone practice sketches, alignment diagrams, even speculative floor plans for unbuilt structures. These fragments give you a glimpse into the architect's process draft, adjust, panic, erase, retry, and sometimes fail. One particularly strange find was a tomb that had two competing layouts, an early plan carved in one direction and a later one rotated 90 degrees. It's as if the entire tomb was flipped midway through construction. Was it a change in ritual, a correction of astronomical alignment, or just an administrative blunder so embarrassing no one ever admitted it? You enter a hallway now where one wall remains unfinished. A red grid lingers on the plaster, faint but visible like the skeleton of a map never born. It's mesmerizing. You imagine a team of painters standing here, brushes in hand, reciting spells as they prepare to draw the next chapter in the pharaoh's posthumous itinerary. But something interrupted them. Maybe the pharaoh died too soon. Maybe a war. Maybe budget cuts. Whatever the reason, the grid remains patient and eternal, waiting for a job that will never be finished. And you, dear traveler, get to stand in that breathless pause. Then there are the maps disguised as art. Take the tomb of Seti-Phaisher, a massive winding with more than 120 meters of decorated corridors. One chamber contains the Book of Gates, a mythical underworld journey told in pictures. To the untrained eye, it's just art. But if you follow the sequence of Gates guardians and solar boats, it becomes a spatial diagram, a psycho-spiritual map. One where the soul must pass through hour by hour, trial by trial, in sync with the sun's journey through the night sky. Now that's multitasking, turning your tomb walls into a cosmic subway map and a spiritual workout regimen. And then there's the famous false maps layouts designed to mislead. Some tombs, especially in the Middle Kingdom, were constructed with decoy corridors, unreachable chambers, or false floor plans inscribed over real ones. Imagine being a tomb robber, crawling through 3 levels of red herrings, only to end up in a closet with no loot, and a very smug-looking statue of Thoth, judging your life choices. You find one such corner now small off the main axis and totally silent. You reach out and press gently on the stone. It doesn't budge, of course. But beneath your fingertips, the design mimics a doorway. Carved, painted, framed. A spiritual exit with no physical function. A map to nowhere unless you were a spirit. Then it was the shortcut, the real way out. This is the contradiction at the heart of ancient Egyptian architecture, maps meant to guide, but not always to reveal. Tombs weren't meant for return visits. They were puzzles meant to be sealed forever, their maps etched in codes only gods could fully read. So when you stare at a layout on papyrus or stone, what are you really looking at? A building plan, a spiritual cheat sheet, a bureaucratic order form, or all three stacked like limestone blocks under a desert sky? You turn one last time before leaving the corridor. The red lines shimmer faintly in the torchlight of your mind, whispering, "This was never meant for you." And that's exactly why it matters. You duck through a doorway so low it feels personal, like the architect was gently forcing humility on anyone who dared enter. On the other side, you step into one of the strangest places in ancient Egypt, not because of what's here, but because of how neatly it's all arranged. Welcome to Saqqara, home of step tombs, grid-like calm, and the most soothing architectural OCD in history. The floor beneath your feet feels flat, almost suspiciously so. You run your palm along the walls and find the corners startlingly square. There's no chaos here, no jagged surprises. Just calm, controlled precision, each room, obeying invisible lines. Each hallway, a math problem passed with flying colors. This isn't a tomb designed by emotion, it's one designed by spreadsheets. You're in the pyramid complex of Djoser. Now, Egypt's first monumental stone structure, built in the 27th century BCE. It was planned by the famous architect Imhotep. Yes, that one, the historical figure, not the horror movie villain. And he brought with him a quiet revolution, stone masonry as philosophy, geometry as theology. The step pyramid isn't just a pyramid. It's a six-tiered wedding cake of eternity stacked with ceremonial courtyards, mock palaces, and corridors that make less sense the more you stare at them. It's not a building. It's a model of royal order. You walk through a narrow colonnade, now columns, flanking you like guards who gave up spears for geometry. The spacing is precise, each pillar, the same height, the same width, the same solemn repetition. And between them, a line of sight straight to a false door. The kind of door no one opens, except maybe a soul, or a god, or a very confused desert cat. As you wander deeper, you notice something odd. The decorative carvings here, panels, niches, cornices, don't match the materials they're made of. Some walls are carved to look like wood. Others mimic woven reed mats. You're inside a tomb that pretends to be a palace made of stone that pretends to be perishable things. It's architectural cosplay, and there's a reason. The tomb was meant to resemble the pharaoh's earthly residence, just improved, eternalized, made indestructible. Everything the king touched in life was recreated here in exaggerated eternal form, right down to the fake doorways and fake beams. This way, when the king rose in the afterlife, he'd feel right at home. No awkward, where's the bathroom in the underworld? And let's talk about those floor plans. Djoser's complex wasn't laid out casually. It followed a central axis with buildings mirrored on either side. Some elements were purely symbolic, like the serdab, a sealed room that held a statue of the king peering out through two tiny holes. Was it for the soul to look out, or for the living to stare? And historians still argue about this peephole paradox. You peek into a side chamber, now low ceiling, long rectangular plan, and walls etched with faux door patterns. These weren't built for function. They were built for balance, for symmetry, for visual calm. And beneath all that, chaos. You see, while the surface of Saqqara screams, order the layers below, tell another story. Beneath the step pyramid lies a spiderweb of tunnels, rooms, and stairwells. Over 5 kilometers of subterranean madness, spiraling beneath the serene geometry above. Some parts were functional burial shafts, storage rooms for food and ritual objects. Others were symbolic places the king would pass through on his spiritual rebirth journey. You enter one such corridor, now barely lit, barely wide enough to walk sideways. The walls here are different, smooth alabaster, cool to the touch, and lined with faint blue inlays. At one point, the entire gallery was embedded with over 36,000 faience tiles, tiny glazed bricks, set in imitation of reed matting. Think the world's most elaborate bathroom tiling job done underground in total darkness. Some of these tiles are still in place. Others are scattered, cracked, or removed during excavations. And some just vanished, possibly looted, possibly misplaced during the eternal panic that comes with moving thousands of blue rectangles without a labeling system. Somewhere, an archaeologist is still trying to reassemble them, like a divine jigsaw puzzle. You walk past a broken alcove. Now its walls showing clear chisel corrections, an angle too sharp here, a doorway widened later. Even in this world of eternal order, mistakes happened. Ancient architects weren't perfect. They were just perfectionists. One of your favorite quirks comes into view, a square room, unadorned plain. Just one niche on the far wall, a block resting at an odd angle. It looks meaningless, but it matches a layout found elsewhere in the complex, suggesting that even blank rooms had purpose. Maybe it was a calibration chamber for rituals. Maybe it housed a statue that's since been looted or buried. Or maybe it was just where someone went to scream after laying the 10,000th tile. Again, historians debate. You lie down here just for a moment and imagine what it must have felt like to finish carving this room. To chip stone for days, weeks, months, just to make a box that no one was ever meant to see. That's commitment. That's devotion. Or possibly union mandated over time. And let's not forget the builders, those artists, laborers and supervisors from Deir el Medina who executed these geometric marvels. Their village preserved, like a time capsule, shows notes, complaints, records of illness, and even jokes scribbled on ostraca. One fragment reads something like, "The foreman's lazy, and this corner is wrong." Ancient subtweets etched in clay. As you rise, you look back through the corridor. The symmetry is still there, still silent, still waiting. You realize this entire complex was more than a tomb. It was a philosophy made permanent, a belief in order above all things. That death, with all its chaos and uncertainty, could be softened, calmed by careful lines, measured shapes, and stone that imitates life. You head back to the main axis, letting your eyes follow the lines. They guide you like rails clean, predictable unbending. Even now, thousands of years later, the geometry still works, still calming, still eternal. You follow the line, the invisible, perfectly calculated center line of the tomb complex. It's not marked, but you feel it under your feet, like a subtle hum through stone. This axis isn't just architectural, it's spiritual. A spine around which the entire afterlife spins. And ahead of you, flanked by two squat columns and a doorway too narrow for ego, lies the true heart of this place. No, not the burial chamber. Not yet. You step into a passageway lined with wall carvings. Every inch speaks, but not to you. These are instructions, not for the living, but for the dead. You are in the realm of sacred cartography now, not maps of place, but maps of process. How to be dead properly, according to the most bureaucratically imaginative civilization ever to decorate a wall. You walk slowly, your fingertips grazing raised hieroglyphs that tell the soul what to do at each stage of its journey. These corridors are covered in what Egyptologists call guide texts, selections from the Book of the Dead, the Amduat, the Book of Gates, and other charming bedtime scrolls full of crocodile-headed judgment demons and enchanted oars. The imagery is stunning. Solar boats riding across a sky of lapis, gods with heads of birds, bulls, and beetles, and always the pharaoh, or sometimes just the soul passing through them. There are gates to open names, to speak passwords, to whisper. And beneath all that vibrant myth, a blueprint, a process flow, a metaphysical checklist. This, you realize, is why many tombs weren't just burial spots. They were manuals. You duck into a smaller chamber, one whose ceiling has collapsed just enough to let in a shaft of dust-filled light. On the far wall is a false door, one of dozens you've seen by now. But this one is different, more ornate. The edges curve inward slightly. The lintel is carved with rows of seated scribes and offering tables, and the base is scuffed, as if many someones stood here for a long time. This is where the living came to visit the dead, not to enter, but to talk. Offerings were laid, names were read aloud, spells were chanted. This was a post-mortem Zoom call, and the signal depended entirely on your pronunciation. You place your palm against the stone and feel nothing. But maybe that's the point. The false door isn't for you. It's for the spirit. For their exit route, their doorway, to hear prayers or come snack on some ghostly beer and onions. And yet, despite all these precise carvings and thoughtful architectural choices, one thing keeps coming up in the record's graffiti. You move to a nearby passage and see it scratched faintly into a corner, just above a depiction of a solar disk, a name. Not a royal name, not a priest, just someone. Likely a builder, maybe an artisan, maybe a bored teenager who slipped in after hours. Ancient Egyptian tombs are covered in this stuff, not the spray-painted kind, but light etchings, names, doodles, short insults. A favorite, Paneb, was here, the same Paneb, in fact, who appears in official Deir el-Medina records as the most scandalous tomb worker of all time. He was accused of drinking on the job, stealing tools, and seducing other workers' wives. So yes, if you ever feel guilty about slacking at work, remember, Paneb carved YOLO into a pharaoh's tomb and still got paid. You continue walking past scenes of the weighing of the heart, the soul balanced against a feather, with Anubis watching like an unimpressed TSA agent. Every step, every corner of this tomb's design is meant to align the soul with the cosmic order. The decorations aren't decorative, they're interactive. They do something. Take the burial chamber. You finally arrive, and it's smaller than you expect. More restrained. No treasure. Just a stone sarcophagus, a few niches in the wall, and more writing. This is where the final spells are inscribed. Here's where the alignment matters most. Some tombs have shafts above the chamber pointing at the stars. In the Pyramid of Khufu, a ventilation shaft lines up almost perfectly with Orion's belt. Not for air, for soul traffic. The idea was that the spirit could ascend through these channels to join the gods in the sky. The whole tomb a launch pad, and the alignment didn't stop at stars. Many tombs were laid out with deliberate orientation entry corridors, facing the rising sun burial chambers, pointing toward the setting one. This mirrored the cycle of death and rebirth. Night was death. Morning was resurrection. The floor plan itself told time. You lie on the floor, just beside the sarcophagus. The air smells of ancient minerals and maybe a hint of bat. You stare upward, where the ceiling is carved with constellations. There's Nut again, the sky goddess arched protectively across the heavens. Her fingertips and toes stretch from corner to corner across eternity. Then you notice something curious. Parts of the layout don't match earlier rooms. Some passageways curve subtly. Others dead end. A few niches are completely unreachable unless you crawl like a lizard through a dust storm. It doesn't make sense until you remember this place wasn't for people. It was for the K, the soul double. And the K didn't need doors. Just intention. It's possible, fringe scholars suggest, that certain rooms were symbolic only. You weren't meant to enter. You were meant to imagine entering. In this way, the tomb's floor plan becomes part of a ritual, a spatial visualization. Like meditation, but with more jackal-headed gods and fewer throw pillows, you sit up again, brushing dust off your back, and feel a deep, surprising calm. You've walked a building that's also a story. You've touched walls that give directions to the dead. And you've stood in a room where the only intended resident has been asleep for 4,000 years. You rise, head toward the exit, and look back once. The false door stands silent. The inscriptions wait. The geometry holds. And though it's hard to believe after all this quiet perfection, somewhere just around the next bend, they carved a corridor that zigs when it should zag. Not by accident, but by design. You step into the bend. It's not dramatic, just a subtle, almost apologetic angle, like the tomb is clearing its throat before continuing. The corridor turns 90 degrees. Then again. Then again. And suddenly, you've walked a pattern that looks suspiciously like someone tried to draw a snake but gave up halfway. This is the crooked corridor problem. You stop and look around, retracing your steps in your mind. None of these turns make sense if the goal was efficient movement. You've been shuffled sideways backward and spun around like a pawn in an underground board game. There's no grand chamber here, no treasure, just a hallway with the layout of someone trying to dodge an awkward conversation. Why would they build it this way? Some historians say these zigzag corridors were meant to confuse robbers. After all, if you turn people around enough, maybe they give up and leave. But here's the twist. Many of these angled passages existed in sealed tombs. Sealed. No robbers expected. No visitors planned. So if it wasn't security, what was it? Spiritual misdirection, ritual geometry, a cosmic obstacle course. Historians still argue whether these bends were practical, symbolic, or straight-up architectural sass. You move along slowly, noting the way each turn cuts off your line of sight. There's never a full view of the path ahead. It's a spatial stutter. The living must experience time in pieces here, step by angled step. And that alone might be the answer, because the dead didn't move like us. To the ancient Egyptians, death wasn't a single event. It was a process, a long one. Your soul had to journey through the duat, the underworld, where it would pass through 12 gates, face serpent demons, answer riddles, and possibly get eaten if you failed a quiz. These corridors, they were dry runs, spiritual training grounds. Each turn a reminder that this wasn't a straight road. Nothing meaningful ever is. You rest in an alcove carved into one turn. It's barely wide enough to sit in, but clearly intentional. There's a small offering niche, a shallow depression where incense may have once burned or a statue once sat. The smoke would have curled along the bend, vanishing into the darkness. You imagine it now, a sacred trail for the soul to follow. Another theory, your favorite, because it's the weirdest, is that these bends were designed to reset the soul's compass. That every turn reoriented the spirit, aligning it with the next phase of the journey. It's like divine GPS recalculating the route every time your mortal attachments tried to pull you off course. And these weren't just random angles either. In many tombs, the initial corridor runs due east, facing the rising sun. But then it shifts south, then west, as the journey moves toward death night and rebirth. The turns trace not geography, but theology. Each angle mimicking the solar cycle, the passage of Ra's boat through the underworld battling chaos before re-emerging at dawn. You walk the angles again, tracing the turns with your fingertips. One wall features faint carvings, less decorative, more diagrammatic. Arrows, perhaps instructions, maybe warnings. The lines look purposeful, and yet no two corridors you visited today are angled the same way. Every tomb is its own personality, some bold, some anxious, some like this one oddly playful. And just when you begin to get comfortable with this tomb's logic, it throws a final surprise. The corridor you're following suddenly widens, not into a chamber, not into a hallway, just for no reason. A bump in the path, an architectural shrug. This space isn't functional. It's too awkward to store anything too short for a ritual. Some fringe theorists believe these sudden widenings mark the soul's moment of transformation, where the weight of the body slipped away and the spirit passed into the next phase. Or maybe they were metaphorical rooms for intangible rituals like memory or regret. You stand in the middle of the bulge, listening, nothing. The silence here is thicker. You wonder how many times these corridors have been walked, not by the living, but in dreams, in rituals, in the imaginations of those preparing to die. Because here's the secret. Even though these tombs were sealed, their blueprints weren't. Copies were made. Practice tombs were constructed in sand. Models carved in miniature. Instructions passed from priest to priest like a sacred recipe. So even those who never saw the finished tomb could visualize the journey. You walk again. The final stretch of the corridor begins to slope downward, this time in a subtle ramp. Not enough to trip, just enough to suggest descent. Symbolic again. Always symbolic. Some tombs, like those in the Valley of the Kings, go so deep that by the time you reach the burial chamber, you've descended over 100 feet. Others stop short, modest dips enough to say, "This is beneath life." No matter the length, the slope always says the same thing. Down is through. Down is sacred. Down is forward. You round one last corner. This one not angled, but curved. Rare. Intentional. The stone here is different too. More polished, lighter in color, as if marking a change. You're close to something. Not a body. Not a treasure. But an idea. This next space wasn't meant to contain death. It was meant to represent its passage. A conceptual chamber laid out like a gate. Pillars on each side. A false door ahead. And silence pressing on your shoulders like a soft, ancient hand. You sit. The air feels dense, but not heavy. Purposeful. You look back at the bends you just walked, each a puzzle piece in a ritual map. A way to turn your body and your mind into a shape the gods might recognize. It occurs to you, then maybe this isn't a place meant to be understood. Not entirely. Maybe the crookedness isn't an error. Maybe it's the point. The journey must twist. Otherwise, you'd never notice when you arrive. You close your eyes. Let the angles hold you. You open your eyes to a surprising sensation light. Not the flickering torchlight you've imagined all this time, but something cooler, gentler, almost celestial. You've entered one of the rarest types of chambers found in these tombs, a room kissed by the sun. The shaft that lets it in is narrow, just wide enough for a dagger of morning light to slice down, illuminating a single corner of the stone floor. You watch as dust motes drift through it like lazy stardust. This isn't some accidental skylight. It's deliberate, designed. And when you step forward and feel the sun's faint warmth on your hand, you understand why the architects carved a hole through 30 feet of solid rock. Because dead or alive, nobody likes total darkness forever. This chamber isn't grand. The walls are plain. The corners are square. But its genius lies in a single geometric feature, a diagonal shaft that perfectly aligns with the solstice sun. On 2 mornings a year, this chamber comes alive. The light hits the shaft at the right angle, travels down its length, and illuminates a specific spot, often the face of a statue, the edge of a sarcophagus, or the painted eyes of the soul's likeness on the wall. It's precision work, a sacred sunbeam engineered like clockwork. You're standing in a spiritual solar observatory buried underground. The tomb of Ramesses VI offers such alignments. So do parts of the Great Pyramid. But even in lesser-known tombs, we find these shafts, these soul tunnels carved with eerie accuracy. Their angles don't match stairways or ramps. They don't line up with anything useful. Unless you consider launching the soul into the cosmos useful, which for the record, the Egyptians absolutely did. And they were picky about direction. Shafts angled too steeply wouldn't catch sunlight. Too shallow, useless for starlight. The sweet spot had to be calculated just right, often using nothing more than string plumb bobs and celestial observation. Imagine standing in the middle of a construction site, holding a reed cord, trying to align your hole in a wall with Orion's belt, based on last night's stargazing and a hunch from Ra. No pressure. You walk to the beam of light now and stretch your arm into it. The contrast is sharp. Your hand glows gold, while the rest of you remains in cool shadow. It's like stepping between worlds, which, if you think about it, is the entire point of this place. The Egyptians believed in a layered cosmos, earth, sky, underworld. The tomb was meant to mirror them all. So they carved these shafts not to ventilate, not to guide visitors, but to connect realms. Literal lines between here and the hereafter. Spiritual USB ports. Some fringe theories go even further. A few scholars have speculated that these shafts weren't just symbolic, they were soul cannons. Their angles correspond to the heliacal rising of certain stars. At death, the soul would shoot up the tunnel and ride the starlight into the sky, a spiritual launch sequence with a limestone countdown. Historians still debate whether these alignments were ceremonial or functional. But when you feel that sunbeam on your skin in a tomb meant to be closed forever, you stop caring about footnotes, because suddenly it all makes sense. This tomb isn't just a burial chamber. It's a machine, a device that runs on light geometry and intention. Its corridors are wires, its chambers circuits, and this shaft a switch. When the sun hits it just right, the machine powers on. Not to preserve the body, but to activate the soul. You sit down just inside the pool of light. Let it warm your face. The shaft above feels impossibly far away, yet perfectly connected. Somewhere up there, the desert sky stretches blue and endless. The same sky Pharaoh would have seen in life. The same sky his soul was meant to return to. And what's wild is how casually perfect this all is. The shaft's alignment doesn't shout. It whispers. No labels. No blinking neon signs. Just a quiet reminder that the universe has structure, and that someone 4,000 years ago believed you could build your way into it. You glance around the chamber and notice faint carvings near the floor. A line. A date. Possibly an inscription indicating when the sun would arrive here. Maybe instructions for a future soul. Or just a very early user manual. And above you, the shaft narrows to a pinhole. The light that enters is old. It traveled millions of miles just to brush against your skin, filtered through desert air, shaped by chisel and angle, and timed by the turning of the earth. There's something comforting about that. Cosmic predictability wrapped in limestone. You lie back slowly, head resting on a worn step, and stare up at the pinpoint of brightness. It reminds you of a camera obscura, of old projector rooms, of the first time you stuck your hand into a sunbeam as a child. But mostly, It reminds you that even in death, the Egyptians wanted company. The sun, the stars, the occasional vulture overhead. The idea that the soul wouldn't just go, it would rise. You smile a little. They were dramatic, weren't they? Not content with a grave. Not satisfied with dirt and silence. They had to engineer a path into the heavens, with angles and blueprints and possibly a few arguments about cubits. And now, here you are, a living body, lying in a chamber designed for eternity, borrowing warmth from a beam of light that has traveled across time and tomb to find its mark. You close your eyes, not to sleep, just to let the tomb do what it was built to do. For a moment, you belong. The light fades, not all at once, but slowly, like a curtain being drawn by time itself. You watch it recede up the shaft, inch by inch, until the chamber is once again a room of shadow and stone. The soul launch window has closed for the day. You rise quietly, stretching limbs that have somehow forgotten they're not centuries old, and turn to leave the chamber. But before you do, something catches your eye, a scratch in the stone. Not a decoration, not a hieroglyph. Just a line, straight, unassuming, perfect, a phantom room. You've entered a section of the tomb where the map says a chamber should be, and yet it isn't there. Just a wall, not hollow, not sealed, just missing, or perhaps never built. This isn't an isolated mystery. Archaeologists have found dozens of instances where the physical structure of a tomb doesn't match its design. In the tomb of Ramesses IX, a side chamber marked in early plans is completely absent. In other tombs, doorways are bricked up with no record of why. One of the strangest examples, a diagram etched into the plaster of a tomb wall, carefully labeled, beautifully rendered, showing a room that simply does not exist in the actual architecture. So what happened? Maybe it was a construction error. Maybe the builders ran out of time, or patience, or budget. Maybe a change in religious doctrine mid-project made the room obsolete. Or maybe the room was never meant to be real. Historians still argue whether these phantom rooms were planned and forgotten, imagined and abandoned, or intended solely for symbolic use, like spaces on a dream map. You place your hand on the cold flat wall where the chamber should be. There's no seam, no echo, just a firm reminder that blueprints aren't always contracts. In ancient Egypt, as in life, plans changed, and sometimes they lied. There's another possibility whispered among the more poetic archaeologists. Yes, they exist, that these phantom rooms were designed as offerings themselves. That the act of designing, the room imagining its use, drawing it into existence, was enough to satisfy ritual. Like writing a letter you'll never send. The map becomes the ritual. The ritual becomes the reality. You begin to walk again, passing more intersections where something feels off. A hallway, just slightly longer than it should be. A chamber wider than its mate on the opposite side. These are small, almost imperceptible errors, unless you're tracing the layout with intent, and you are, which means you begin to see the places where intentions were overwritten by reality. The ancient equivalent of someone going, you know what? Let's move this wall, a cubit to the left, followed by 3 artisans groaning in unison. In the tomb of Seti, one of the most elaborate in the Valley of the Kings, there's a mysterious annex that shows up in some records, but not in others. Some believe it was looted, and then sealed over. Others believe it never existed at all. And then there's the famous case of Tutankhamun's tomb. It's oddly small for a pharaoh. Some researchers suspect that hidden behind its walls lie forgotten chambers, maybe even the tomb of Nefertiti. You think of that now, standing in front of another too smooth wall, wondering what lies behind it. Nothing. A cache of grave goods, a hallway that leads to a room with one chair and no explanation. You press your ear to the stone. You hear only silence, the kind of silence that feels suspiciously curated. What makes this all the more eerie is how often ancient plans survived. Architects used red and black ink to outline their ideas. Red for the framework, black for precision. Sometimes those markings are still visible beneath later plaster. They show you the version before perfection, the raw edits. You spot one, now a half-erased line, etched faintly under the ceiling curve. It's not aligned with anything anymore. It's an artifact of an earlier idea never fully deleted. A ghost in the geometry. You crouch and imagine the moment of change. A team of builders standing here with cords and measuring rods, mid-debate about what the gods would prefer. Did someone overrule the blueprint? Did a priest say, "Actually, we need fewer corners for Ra today"? These places, these phantom spaces, are filled with human fingerprints, imperfection, hesitation, redirection. Not failures, just decisions made in the dust of time. And not all phantom rooms are spiritual metaphors. Some are just funny mistakes. There's an unfinished tomb near Aswan where the doorway leads to another wall. Just wall. Like someone made a door-shaped hope and forgot to inform the rock behind it. Somewhere an ancient worker probably muttered, "Well, that's coming out of my afterlife bonus." You stand now in the center of a chamber that does exist, but according to one map, shouldn't. It's large, with uneven walls and a ceiling painted in half-completed stars. Only a few constellations were finished before the paintwork stopped. Maybe the king died too early. Maybe the artist fell ill. Or maybe they just ran out of blue. That's the quiet heartbreak of these tombs. They are places of impossible planning, hundreds of decisions, calculations, and hopes, all sealed under tons of rock. But sometimes time ran out. The soul's departure date didn't always wait for final inspection. You lie down here for a moment, staring at the half-finished stars. The geometry ends with ellipses, a story cut off mid-sentence. And maybe that's what phantom rooms really are. Not failures, but the memory of an intention. A placeholder for what might have been. A soft, stone-bound what if. You close your eyes. Not to dream, but to imagine. What else might lie behind the walls? You sit up slowly, eyes adjusting again to the dimness. In the quiet that follows the phantom room's mystery, your path takes you somewhere simpler, yet no less strange. A door. Not a real door, of course. You've seen enough of those to know they're rarely what they seem down here. This one's carved into the wall, beautifully, intricately, and as solid as the stone it pretends to open through. Welcome to the world of false doors. The most honest lies in the tomb. You move closer. The frame is outlined in red and black ink, chiseled deeply to resemble the wooden doors of everyday houses. A lintel jams even carved hinges. The top often carries the name of the tomb owner. The sides lists of offerings. There's no handle, but there is a small ledge where food or incense might have once been placed. You place your hand gently against the stone. It's smooth, slightly concave, worn from centuries of rituals, prayers, hands, perhaps the occasional bribe to a particularly stubborn soul. Because this isn't just a decoration, it's a portal, a one-way threshold for the deceased to move between worlds. The Egyptians believed the soul had several parts, ko, ba, akho, among others, and the ko, in particular, needed sustenance. Physical sustenance, offerings, bread, beer, onions, maybe a few figs, if the family was feeling generous. But the ko couldn't just roam freely. It needed an access point, a door, or at least a very convincing imitation of one. That's what this is. A metaphysical exit ramp. You picture the scene: relatives coming down to the tomb during feast days, laying food at the base of this carved door, whispering names, pouring beer, maybe laughing a little too loudly at Uncle Horemheb's awkward eulogy, all to keep the connection alive, to keep the ka nourished, to remind the soul it was still part of the living world. And here's the twist: they didn't expect the dead to step out. Not physically, but spiritually. A ghostly presence felt through ritual. The false door was a point of contact, a spiritual touchpad. And by carving it into the stone, the Egyptians were saying, "You are welcome here anytime." You notice now the arrangement of offerings etched into the panels, loaves of bread stacked like mini pyramids, ducks tied by the neck, a surprisingly common motif, jugs of beer cuts of meat. It's a menu, not just a mural, a visual inventory for what should be given. Some false doors even included cheat sheets, texts that listed exactly what the soul expected in case the descendants got lazy. One particularly delightful: find a false door with an inscription that reads something like, "If you can't bring real food, recite this instead." It's the ancient equivalent of, "If you can't attend in person, please send thoughts and prayers." You walk along the wall, noticing more of these doors. Some are simple. Others, elaborate columns of text framing the door like sacred wallpaper. The more important the deceased, the more prominent the false door. In some tombs, you'll even find multiple false doors, one for each spiritual direction, like the soul needed an emergency exit strategy. And not all of these were confined to tombs. False doors appeared in temples, private homes, even small shrines, anywhere the dead might want to swing by for a quick blessing or snack. You're starting to wonder if every wall in ancient Egypt was just a carefully disguised RSVP request to the afterlife. You kneel in front of one. Now this one, smaller perhaps, belonging to a wife or servant. The carvings are softer, less pristine, but the message is the same. Come when you're ready. We haven't forgotten you. And for all their serenity, there's a peculiar tension in these doors. They represent a need that never quite resolves, a hunger that must be answered by the living. The tomb is designed to preserve forever, but the soul, it still relies on you to show up with offerings. And if you don't, well, the door is here. The soul might come knocking, or maybe just sulk. You lean back thinking of how these doors were built with care and repeated by rote. Whole workshops existed to produce them. You can almost hear the quiet tap of chisels, the murmur of scribes, the measured movements of apprentices copying the same lines over and over. And one fringe theory suggests, brace yourself, that the placement of these false doors followed acoustic rules, that the rooms around them were designed to carry voices, that a priest's chant spoken near the door would travel through the tomb like a whispered corridor. No microphones, just resonance. Historians still argue whether this was intentional or happy accident. But if you sit here long enough and whisper into the curve of the wall, you might hear your own voice return, soft, disembodied, like someone else is finishing your sentence. The magic of the false door is that it acknowledges a contradiction. The dead are gone but still here, absent but present, sealed away but invited to visit. And these carved doors don't try to solve that. They just make room for it. You rise, brushing the dust from your hands, and step back. From a distance, the door looks even more convincing. The shadows trick your mind into seeing depth where there is none. You know it doesn't open, but you still find yourself wondering what if. That's the thing about these tombs. They aren't built for us, but they know us. They understand how to play with expectation, with symmetry, with space, and with hope. Even when the hallway ends, there's always one more door to imagine. You stretch your legs and ease down a hallway that feels for once surprisingly modern. Long, clean, repetitive. On either side are side chambers and carved instructions. But there's something familiar about the whole thing. You pause and squint. This layout, it looks like an IKEA showroom, the ancient Egyptian version. No meatballs, sadly, but the organization, impeccable. You've stepped into the portion of the tomb where the journey of the soul is no longer metaphor. It's a walkthrough. Literally, a series of chambers arranged like a sacred obstacle course, complete with visual cues, step-by-step instructions, and spiritual furniture placements that tell you exactly where to go, what to do, and how not to get eaten by a crocodile-headed judgment monster. This isn't just burial architecture. It's a user experience. Each room is labeled, not in a big neon font, of course, but through carved texts and symbols that made perfect sense to the initiated. For instance, a doorway might be flanked by images of the god Osiris and a gatekeeper demon. Translation: this is a checkpoint. Present your name, know your passwords, pass or perish. Very efficient. You walk through one chamber that clearly represents the Hall of Two Truths, the place where the heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, the goddess of justice and balance. There's a depiction on the wall, Anubis tending the scales, Thoth recording the result, Amit the devourer lurking just in case things don't go your way. All symbolic, right? Except look down. On the floor, a rectangular depression, just wide enough to resemble a ritual platform. It's not a coffin space. It's not random. It's the exact dimensions you'd need to perform a weighing ceremony, or at least pretend to. This is a station, a stop in the process, a place, the ba. Your soul would pause, experience judgment, and move forward if it passed. And the tomb, it guides the way, room by room, like following assembly instructions for eternity. The Book of the Dead often accompanied the journey. Not a single book, but a customizable set of spells, prayers, and directions. Tomb walls frequently reproduce these texts, or parts of them word for word. And in some tombs, we find what can only be described as spatial translations of those spells. You enter a narrower passage now. The walls curve slightly inward, guiding you like a funnel. The ceiling drops. The floor rises. It feels like you're being compressed. Why? Because the next chamber is rebirth. You don't walk into it, you emerge. And sure enough, you arrive at a space shaped like a womb, circular, softly carved, with lotus motifs blooming from every surface. If this room had scent diffusers, They'd smell like myrrh and fresh beginnings. The message is clear. You have passed judgment. The afterlife awaits. Please proceed to check out. You continue forward into what resembles, yes, you're sure, now a corridor with stations. Some have benches, others small niches where offerings were once placed. In one particularly well-preserved tomb, archaeologists found outlines on the floor where ritual objects were supposed to go. Painted guides, like ancient chalk markings. Vase here. Bread tray here. Statue facing west. It's not spiritual chaos. It's spiritual choreography. Some tombs even included models. Of these layouts, miniature replicas placed inside the burial itself. Small stone boxes carved with tiny rooms, staircases, and doorways. Picture a dollhouse, but instead of a living room, there's a judgment chamber and a portal to the field of reeds. Kids today have play kitchens. Pharaohs had play underworlds. And in the more elaborate tombs, you'll find symbolic furniture headrests carved from alabaster benches, of polished granite, even miniature beds. But these weren't made for comfort. They were part of the ritual process. The dead had to sit, rest, rise, wash, eat, be judged, and eventually ascend. So the architecture, it helped them do that. With proper staging, you stop at a curious alcove, half room, half shrine, with a recess shaped like a door, but filled with stone. This isn't a passage. It's a boundary. Beyond here, the layout changes. The tomb stops acting like a house and starts acting like a temple. The transition is subtle but unmistakable. Ceilings lift. Columns appear. Decorations shift from private imagery, family scenes, favorite pets, fishing trips, to grand cosmic themes. Now you're seeing boats of the sun wheels of rebirth serpent walls. The tone is elevated, formal, like moving from the dressing room into the main stage. Because from here onward, the tomb isn't about you. It's about the gods, or more specifically, it's about your ability to join them. One room resembles the chapel at Karnak scaled down. Another, with its repeating niches, mirrors a storage room in the temple of Hatshepsut. These aren't accidents. They're imitations. The dead weren't just meant to visit the divine, they were meant to become divine. And the tomb's layout walked them through the process like a pre-death rehearsal dinner. Some fringe theories even go so far as to call these layouts ritual scripts. That by walking the tomb in a certain order, the soul performed a rite of passage, an initiation sequence. The dead as priest, the tomb as temple. The final test, navigating it correctly. Historians still debate how literally this was all taken. Was the soul believed to physically move through the rooms? Or was it symbolic, a visualization tool like a memory palace? Either way, the geometry makes one thing clear: you weren't just being buried. You were being guided. You look back the way you came. Each room now feels like a step you passed. A lesson. A phase. This isn't chaos. It's choreography. An afterlife arranged in sequential scenes with appropriate lighting and set design. You smile. You've seen maps of the soul. Now you've walked them. You lean against the cool wall of the next chamber, taking a breath, if not out of exertion, then out of quiet awe. You've seen precision in layout. You've seen myth and structure. But now you want to know how. How did they make all this? Time to look behind the scenes. Because the Egyptian tomb wasn't just a spiritual experience, it was a feat of engineering. And behind every corridor, false door, and golden proportion was a team of people wielding surprisingly humble tools, dealing with very human frustrations, and occasionally botching a doorway before anyone could yell, "Get the chisel!" You crouch near a stretch of wall that's half finished, one of those rare archaeological gifts that lets you see the process in motion. At the top, a section is smoothed and painted. In the middle, the figures are outlined, but not yet carved. And at the bottom, just red grid lines. The first sketch. This was the draftsman's domain. Egyptian artists didn't freelance their wall art. Everything was measured, planned, executed. First in red, drawn with ochre ink using reed brushes, and then corrected in black. The red lines show the grid typically 18 squares tall for the human figure from the soles of the feet to the hairline. These weren't stick figures. They were divine blueprints. You run your fingers gently across one red line. Faint, but still visible after thousands of years. That's not magic. That's planning. And who made these lines? Draftsmen. Skilled artisans trained in temple workshops, often part of family lineages. They weren't anonymous either. Many signed their work, or at least left marks. In one tomb, in Deir el Medina, the worker, Paneb Yes, that Paneb again scrawled his name in places he absolutely wasn't supposed to. It's the ancient equivalent of "Steve was here on sacred stone." You smile. Behind you, a partially carved figure seems to roll its eyes. Next came the plasterer's men, who would smooth uneven walls with a mud and gypsum mixture. You can still see their handiwork in the way corners slope just slightly, or in how brush strokes from 4,000 years ago remain frozen in time. After them, the sculptors, armed with copper chisels, dolerite pounders, and the patience of saints. These workers transformed red lines into bas-reliefs. And before you imagine them gently tapping away, consider this dolerite is harder than the limestone walls they worked on. Carving wasn't soft work. It was thunderous. Sparks sometimes flew. You would have heard the echoes halfway across the necropolis. And of course, not everything went smoothly. You duck into a side corridor and spot a glorious blunder, a misaligned cartouche. The royal name is shifted several inches off-center, corrected in a panic with a second version just above it. No one erased the first one. Too late. Too permanent. They just made a second. Ancient version of Ctrl Z, draw it again, and pretend no one notices. Nearby, you see what might be a correction note scratched into the plaster. Start here. Or maybe move the sarcophagus after painting. The tone is rushed. Someone was running behind. Some fringe archaeologists believe they've even found checklists in some tombs lists of supplies, phases of construction, or payment tallies scratched into walls later plastered over. Like finding a post-it note inside a cathedral. And then there's the matter of light. How did they work in total darkness? Theories vary. Some say mirrors angled to reflect sunlight down corridors. Others suggest oil lamps, but that brings soot, which would mar the art. Some believe they used translucent alabaster window blocks to funnel light inward. Historians still argue whether mirrors were effective enough for deep chambers, or if teams simply worked in short shifts before going half blind. You stand in a darker section now, eyes adjusting. If this space was ever lit, it was barely. You wonder what it was like for the worker, lying on his back, etching stars into the ceiling, trying not to smear wet paint with the tip of his nose. And then there's the awkward stuff. Sometimes rooms were started and abandoned. Maybe they hit a fault in the rock. Maybe someone changed their mind. Or maybe someone royally messed up the geometry. In one tomb, a corridor curves. then stops at a blank wall, a perfect hallway to nowhere. Architects call it design drift. You call it whoops. You enter a chamber that bears the signs of heavy chiseling, unfinished, unpainted, but with deep gouges in the wall. The floor is littered with ancient debris, undisturbed, a forgotten room. Maybe once meant to house grave goods, maybe never finished. And the tools, you find reproductions in museums today. Copper chisels, small mallets, smoothing stones, plumb bobs carved from lead. The copper dulled quickly, meaning craftsmen had to resharpen frequently or switch tools mid-carving. In deeper tombs, someone's entire job was just to carry tools in and out. An ancient intern, some of the most surprising finds come from the workers' village of Deir el-Medina. Personal letters, notes complaining of illness, records of days off for religious festivals. Even one complaint that reads like I came to work, but no bread was provided. That's right, labor strikes. Ancient Egyptians were the first recorded workers to go on strike for late payments. Tomb building wasn't just sacred, it was unionized. You leave the unfinished chamber and pass a wall covered in instructions for a ritual. Not decorative hieroglyphs, but functional ones. What offerings to place, what direction to face, what incantations to chant. It's not art. It's a to-do list, and even these had to be drafted, reviewed, chiseled, and painted all under a strict timeline. Because once the pharaoh died, the clock started ticking. The entire tomb had to be completed fast. The mummification process took 70 days. After that, burial had to proceed. There was no wiggle room. Imagine painting the Sistine Chapel, but with a looming deadline, limited torches, a team of grumpy artists, and a boss who might literally curse you. You run your hand along the last stretch of wall in this corridor, and there it is, a final flourish. A small carved bird tucked into the corner of a lotus. It's not part of the design. It's a signature, quiet, discreet, the only way a draftsman could leave their mark for eternity without upsetting the overseer. That bird is the whisper behind the blueprint, the wink beneath the geometry, the human hand forever at work inside the machine of eternity. You take a slow breath and step away from the carefully scratched bird signature, trailing your hand along the wall as you walk. The texture shifts. The polish is gone. The reliefs are simpler. Something feels different now. Less grandeur, more grit. You're not in a pharaoh's tomb anymore. Welcome to the resting place of the other Egyptians. This section of your journey leads you away from royal tombs, away from grand pyramids and valley chambers lined with gold-dipped symbolism. You're in a burial site for a lesser noble, or a priest, or more intriguingly, a peasant. And even here, tucked far from the official necropolises, geometry quietly persists. You pause at a humble doorway, cut into rock, not monumental, but proportional. Its lintel is undecorated, its walls uneven. And yet when you step inside, the layout is unmistakable. Rectangular main chamber, rear niche, false door, burial shaft. It's a scaled-down version of the royal plan. It's the IKEA floor plan, but in miniature. And this is where things get really interesting, because despite their limited resources, no workforce of hundreds, no polished granite, no star-dappled ceilings, the non-elite still mimic the design of their kings. On a smaller scale, yes. Cruder materials, absolutely. But the structure remained, as though the divine geometry itself had trickled down. You run your hands along the walls. They're unpainted, but not unplanned. The main chamber is laid out on a similar axis, east to west, life to death. And just like in the Valley of the Kings, the burial shaft is dug into the western half. Symbolism over luxury. Even in poverty there was design. In one village, necropolis near Amarna, archaeologists discovered clusters of small rock-cut tombs, all sharing the same orientation, the same key elements. Some even featured hand-drawn maps on pottery shards, crude sketches indicating where to carve rooms and recesses. You imagine a group of masons hunched over a dirt diagram, arguing over where to place the offering table. No gold, no incense, just chalk sweat and the occasional curse muttered in Middle Egyptian. One tomb catches your eye, just a shallow pit, a ledge, and a rectangular slab at the back. The slab has a faint carving, two arms outstretched in offering pose, and a few scratched symbols. Hard to read. Likely done by a family member, not a professional. And yet, it works. The placement follows the rules. The door faces east. The slab is positioned opposite the shaft. The dead lies between them. And the living can visit, speak the name, leave bread. It's enough. You crouch at the edge of the shaft and peer down. Unlike royal burials, this one was barely sealed. A few stones over the top. Maybe a jar of beer. Maybe a clay ushabti, those little figurines meant to work on your behalf in the afterlife. Rich tombs had hundreds. This one, just one. And he's missing an arm. But he's still standing. Still doing his job. 4,000 years later, you walk to a wall where a small rectangular outline has been carved into the plaster. It's clearly a floor plan, a personal one, the layout of the house where the deceased once lived. These were sometimes included, so the soul wouldn't feel disoriented after death. Just imagine waking up in eternity, confused, and then, oh look, there's my kitchen. It's charming and a little heartbreaking. The idea that someone believed they'd still want to find their favorite stool in the next life. You find another tomb nearby, carved more deeply into the rock. This one's fancier, likely a scribe or low-ranking temple worker. The walls are smoothed, the shaft reinforced. And here's the twist. It follows the layout of a royal tomb. Almost exactly, just smaller. A central hallway, side niches, a faux chapel chamber. All the sacred spatial cues compressed like a foldable map. It's like someone took the blueprint for Seti III's tomb and photocopied it at 50%. And this isn't rare. Across Egypt, archaeologists have found countless non-royal tombs that emulate royal patterns. Some even include star ceilings crudely painted in soot and white pigment, but arranged according to celestial order. No lapis lazuli, but the idea is there. That's the power of sacred geometry. It transcended class. One fringe theory even suggests that certain floor plans were part of a standardized burial package, a template distributed by mortuary priests, adjustable based on income, like a pre-designed template. Choose your axis, your number of chambers, your offering list. Print your afterlife. Historians debate whether this was a centralized practice or just widespread imitation. But either way, the result is clear. The architectural logic of the divine wasn't reserved for kings. You stand now in a cramped chamber where a small altar once stood. Nothing grand, just a flat stone blackened with residue. It's positioned opposite a doorway intentionally, so that during ritual visits, the deceased's ka could face their guests. The symmetry isn't perfect. The angles wobble. The walls are cracked. But the plan is clear. You walk outside, now blinking in the sun. The tomb entrance is almost hidden, just a rough square in a limestone hill. You could pass it 100 times and never notice. And yet inside, that was geometry, ritual, structure, eternity. Not because someone was famous, but because someone cared. You sit on a rock and glance out over the landscape. From here, the great tombs and the modest ones look about the same, just dark spots in a sunlit slope, equalized by time. The royal tombs may be bigger, but the logic, it was shared. The sun hangs low now, casting long shadows across the desert floor, and you begin to descend once more, back into the tombs, into the half-built, the half-understood, and the half-forgotten, because tonight you've arrived at the unfinished lines, and they are everywhere. You duck into a chamber where the ceiling still bears the red guide grid, no carving, no pigment, just lines, drafted thousands of years ago, frozen mid-process, as if the artist had simply walked away and never returned. You walk slowly across the room, and you see more rough sketchings of what might have become a frieze, a doorway halfway carved, a name missing from its cartouche. This isn't sloppiness. This is interruption. You run your hand along one wall, where a figure was started. The head is there, the arms hinted at, but the legs never emerged. Was it the death of the tomb owner? A sudden shift in political favor? Maybe a work stoppage from the artisans, like those recorded at Deir el Medina when rations didn't arrive on time? Or maybe the builders realized something had changed. In one unfinished tomb near Luxor, archaeologists found 4 abandoned corridors, each started at a slightly different angle. It was as if the team kept adjusting direction, unable to commit. One theory says they hit soft rock. Another says a new burial order came through mid-project. A more fringe idea: the tomb was never meant to be finished. That the pause was symbolic. An architectural sigh. You pass another wall, bearing an outline of a deity Osiris by the look of it. His outline is perfect regal, but the chiseling stops abruptly at the elbow. No offering arms, no eyes, just the shape of reverence undone. It's tempting to see these interruptions as failure, but the Egyptians may have seen something different. After all, in the book of Coming Forth by Day, a text etched in countless tombs, the soul is not expected to finish everything. It's expected to begin. Perhaps the unfinished lines are offerings too, a statement of intention left open for eternity. You move into a tighter corridor now, where something even stranger awaits overlapping plans. 2 sets of lines faintly visible under plaster. One red, one black. One older, one newer. It's clear the wall was remeasured. The proportions changed. Maybe the figure was made too tall, or a spell needed more room. The first plan was covered up, but not erased. You're looking at ancient architectural editing. Historians have documented entire tombs that show this process: initial designs, revisions, corrections. In one royal tomb, a corridor was extended 20 feet after. The decorations were already done, meaning the artists had to shift the visual narrative, like adding an extra chapter to a book already in print. You pass by a pillar, covered in text, but the last 2 lines trail off unfinished. A sudden change in handwriting suggests a different scribe stepped in. Maybe the first died. Maybe he was reassigned. Maybe he simply made a mistake, and his apprentice was asked to fix it quietly. You can't help but smile. The more you look, the more you find the ghost of process, the very human story behind divine intention. Tombs weren't created by the gods. They were created by people. By deadlines, shifting plans, dull chisels, bruised fingers, and the occasional supervisor yelling, "That line curves too far left." One of the more famous debates among Egyptologists centers on an inscription in the tomb of Ramesses III. The text seems off too short rushed. Some say it was a last-minute addition. Others believe it was a cover-up for something removed. A few argue it was the result of painter fatigue, a real phenomenon observed in later tombs, where decoration quality declines the deeper you go. Because let's be honest, if you've painted 142 feet of lotus borders, your enthusiasm probably wanes around foot 98. You kneel now at the edge of a sunken chamber that was clearly meant to be grander. The floor drops, but the walls don't rise with it. They remain blank. The ceiling is cracked, but unadorned. It feels incomplete, and maybe that was the point. There's a theory that some tombs were intentionally left unfinished as ritual placeholders meant to represent the unknowable. The duat, after all, is not a static place. It shifts. It evolves. It resists conclusion. What better way to honor that than with a room that never resolves? You rise and step into a corridor where unfinished figures appear in a row, scribes with no ink gods, without crowns, women with incomplete hair. It's oddly beautiful, like seeing scaffolding around a cathedral, but knowing the structure underneath is sacred all the same. It makes you think of all the lives that never reach the final chapter, all the stories with no ending, and how even those stories matter. The tomb didn't need to be perfect. It just needed to be true. You walk the final length of the corridor, noticing one last oddity, a tiny star painted in the top corner of a room. No others accompany it, just one, slightly crooked, a test stroke, a whimsical addition, a silent signature, or maybe a reminder that even in the most ordered space where cubits were counted and geometry reigned supreme, there was still room for one imperfect glowing mark. You're near the end now. The tomb is quiet in a different way, less mystery, more knowing. The walls around you hum with a kind of settled silence, like they've been waiting for you to understand. Or maybe they knew you would, because this is the part where everything, every shaft corridor and carved line begins to point home. You step into the last room, and it's not the largest. In fact, it's modest, square. A single column in the center with 4 small niches cut into each wall, like open mouths waiting to speak. No murals, no golden sarcophagus, just balance, just intention. You walk in slowly, and it becomes clear this room wasn't made for display. It was made for direction. At the center, the floor is slightly indented, not accidental, not decorative. This was where the coffin sat, or more precisely, where the soul would rest. And from here, each corner of the room aligns with something greater. One niche points east toward Ra, the rising sun, the beginning. Another west to Osiris, the sunset, the underworld. A third points north where the imperishable stars never set, immortality. The fourth south, where the Nile flows from, where fertility and return begin. Every direction meant something, and every direction pointed home. You sit cross-legged in the center and look around. This is the culmination of the tomb's logic. All the angles, all the turns, all the false doors, shafts, and sacred zigzags they brought you here. To stillness, to purpose. The Egyptians didn't build tombs for death. They built them for continuity, for passage, for motion. Every line was a gesture forward. Every wall, a sentence in the story of going on. They believed that if you mapped the soul's journey precisely enough, if you carved it into stone, it would happen. And maybe it did. You remember now the ceiling from that chamber, weeks or hours ago, painted with Nut, the sky goddess. You remember the shaft of light perfectly aligned with a solstice. You remember the false door, the checklist of offerings, the ritual alcoves disguised as design choices. All of them guided the soul to this final axis, where it no longer needed to move. Because here, the soul stops traveling and starts being. You walk to one of the niches and crouch. The floor is worn smooth. The walls etched with faint spells, too faded to read aloud, but not too faded to feel. One line repeats 3 times in a circle. He goes forth by day. It's the name of the Book of the Dead in its original form, but it's also the final instruction. Because once the journey is complete, once every chamber has been passed, every trial faced, every angle obeyed, the soul doesn't stay in the tomb. It leaves, out through the shaft, aligned with Orion, through the false door, through the map, into the sky. This final room isn't a chamber. It's a launch pad, the center of a compass, carved in stone, pointing outward in all directions. You lie down in the center, now where the coffin would have rested. Your shoulders touch the edge of the carved groove. Your head points west, your toes east. You close your eyes and feel it, that faint geometry beneath you. It's still there, still working. You're not in a tomb. You're in a plan. Not a plan for burial, a plan for transcendence. You take one more breath, steady and slow. The room around you seems to soften, to blur, not because it's fading, but because it's complete. Everything it had to say, it said, in stone, in silence, in form. You are home, and now, as the tomb quiets completely, let your body sink deeper into stillness. The air here is soft, now cool and weightless, like memory wrapped in silk. The walls fade into shadow, but the shape of them stays with you. Measured, calm, complete. You've walked the map, the long and winding geometry, the angled turns and unfinished lines. You've crouched beneath sky shafts and listened for footsteps in chambers built for no sound at all. And now you've come to rest in the very center where everything the Egyptians imagined about eternity was focused into quiet form. No more questions, no more steps, just breath, just stillness. Let the journey settle in your chest, like dust on ancient stone, soft, even without urgency. You've followed the corridors meant for gods, felt the pulse of sacred architecture, and touched a world that mapped not just space, but soul. And now there is nothing left to do. No more chambers, no more shafts, no more wondering what's behind the wall. Because here in this final room, every direction already points where you're meant to go. So let the echoes drift away. Let the geometry dissolve. Let yourself rest. You've made it through the tomb, and the tomb has made it through to you. Good night, traveler.